Hello, this is David Lee from Prevent Connect, and welcome to today's Prevent Connect web conference, Prevention Through Understanding and Addressing Sexual Behavior of Children. This is part of our series of Power and Prevention Ending Child Sexual Abuse web conference series, and it's pleased to see so many people from around the country and North America joining us. We do have, Prevent Connect is a national project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the United States government, the CDC, or CalCASA. I'm really pleased to have our series co-hosts here. We have Cordelia Anderson and Joan Dabasha. Cordelia, are you on the phone?
I am on the phone. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you. Technology came through. It's great to have you joining us.
Yay.
And Joan, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Great to be here.
Great. Thank you. And Joan, if you can be just a little bit louder, that would be great.
Will do.
Perfect. So I'm going to hand the podium over to our co-hosts.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for being on. We're very excited about the session and the presenters we have today. The first thing I'm trying to get so I can go to the next slide. If somebody could advance that, I see in the podium right now. This is Cordelia. We wanted to just mention to you that there are a series of webinars that we have done related to power and prevention, ending child sexual abuse. Those are recorded, as this will be today, so that those are all available for you to go ahead and look at and get that information. It's a great resource. The other, for today, the very specific learning objective of this particular session on prevention through understanding and addressing sexual behavior of children is to be able to really describe the typical sexual development and problematic sexual behavior, to be able to name key elements of effective ways to support healthy relationships and address problematic sexual behavior of children, and to be able to identify new resources available for professionals. And in this next one is Joan, so we need to switch over to Joan so she can go, or just I can move this. There we go.
Just go ahead and move for me. That's great, Cordelia.
Okay.
So one of the questions we have is really why this session? And one of the things that we really, I think over the years, certainly in my career, found that it's important to differentiate adults from adolescents, and that what we know about adult sexual behavior is very different than adolescent sexual behavior. And I think what's exciting to me is that professionals are now seeing that children are also different than adolescents and adults. So we're going to be focusing today on this growing interest, I think, in the topic of children and children's sexual behaviors, and seeing this as really both an ideal time for education, that going beyond what has usually been done in the past around teaching children around child sexual abuse prevention, but also sort of moving that to actually what we can do in terms of intervention at this time. So we look at both the questions today about how to prevent as well as how and when to intervene with children and their sexual behaviors. So back to you, Cordelia.
Can you just advance that slide for me there while we're switching over? So the next really question is picking up on Joan. With Just Beginnings Collaborative, I was able to do a report looking at who's doing what related to child sexual abuse services and prevention in the United States. And this question, really, how do we deal with children? How do we talk about sexual behaviors? How do we deal with them when they're harmful, et cetera, was really a dominant trend in the country of people wanting more information and resources, but it connected to this issue. The whole language of how we talk about this. So if people could just chat in. When you've heard media reports talking about a child who's committed a sex offense, what are some of the terms that you've heard that we would just assume get rid of, and or terms that you think that you've switched from using over time? So chat in. What are different ways you've heard children referred to who have committed sex offenses? Deviant, troubled child, we've got a lot of them, delinquent, offender, monster, pervert, past victim, perpetrator, mini perpetrator. So a lot of the mini perp, child predator, destined to have a lifelong identity as a sex offender. A lot of these different terms get short-term and long-term labels, which is part of why we very much want to address language and what we can do for prevention. Back to Joan.
So for me, one of the things that I think was really most moving to me when I started doing this work was the first time I actually spoke with a mom who was talking about her 13-year-old son and said that it would be easier to say that my 13-year-old son was a murderer than to say that he had sexually abused her 6-year-old neighbor. And I still, I mean, that sort of sentiment really takes my breath away, because that we have an opportunity to really intervene when you're talking about, especially parents who recognize the behaviors in their children. And the point that I want to make here as well is that when we talk about these behaviors, and one of the comments came up like rapists, that we tend to think about the behaviors as basically in terms of either rape or some sort of penetration. And there's a range of different behaviors that would fall under perpetration. And we want to be able to look at that range of behaviors that would be touching and non-touching, hands-on offenses, as well as maybe looking at child pornography. There are a whole variety of different kinds of behaviors. So that's what we want to really highlight, is the difference in behaviors that we're looking at over time.
And Joan, can you just get a little bit louder, please? We appreciate that.
Yes,
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
So,
back to you, Cordelia.
Yep, okay, so if you can advance that slide. There we go. Our next one is related to how do we actually talk to our children. And as somebody who did an early child sexual abuse prevention program in the mid-'70s, I know that we really focused on touch and talking about different kinds of touch, and that no one has the right to touch you, when you don't want to be touched, etc. But it took us a while to really look at how we balance that message, and it's still one of the ways that could shift our education a lot. If, like what we learned with bullying, it's not that we focus so much on what you need to do to not be bullied, but that you need to not be the one causing harm. You do not have the right to force, trick, or manipulate anyone else into touch. We need to ask. We need to understand consent. So there's a lot of different messages that we can be using that focus on not doing the harmful behavior and being aware of the impact of your behavior on others.
So I know that
Joan.
for me, as I mentioned earlier, that the conversations that I've had with parents, that one of the things we've heard over and over again is that the key, that message that does not get out very much, is there's a really key message of hope. I hope that if we intervene early, that we can really change the developmental trajectory of these children, and that this, what I'm seeing again over time, is I've begun to see some significant policy changes, and actually even internationally. I had the chance to be in Australia, and this past year, and one of the things I found was very exciting was that they see that a child under the age of 15 as a child in their DCF system and their Department of Children and Families, so that if a child, whether they are being abused or acting out abuse on another child, that they're still considered a responsibility of adults and responsibility of the system, and not put into the criminal justice system. It's just a very different perspective than we have here, and I wanted to say that really is one that we want, that message that comes from that is a message of hope, which I think is really the piece that we want to convey as we go forward today. So I'll turn this back to Cordelia for you to do the introductions.
And we have two powerful presenters with excellent resources and great histories to bring you this information, and we're delighted to have Jane Solovsky, who is PhD and a professor, licensed clinical psychologist, and Associate Director of the Center on Child Abuse and Neglect. She received her doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Alabama, and she's currently professor in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. But since 1997, she's been the director of the Children with Sexual Behavior Problems program, and her research is in the area of treatment outcomes and program evaluation of services for children affected by child maltreatment. And we'll hear from Dr. Solovsky at first, and then we'll be hearing from Michelle Miller. And Michelle has a PhD. She's a licensed clinical social worker and a licensed clinical professional counselor with over 20 years experience in child welfare and over 15 years experience providing mental health care and clinical supervision to mental health practitioners, along with a lot of training and implementation of evidence-based practices and treatment. She co-founded the Butte Child Evaluation Center, Montana's first accredited Children's Advocacy Center, and that was in 1998, where she served for many years as the director, and then was also instrumental in starting a number of different things and services, chapters, including of the National Children's Alliance in Montana. In her private practice, Dr. Miller specializes in child family traumatic stress treatment and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. So you'll be hearing from both of these long-term experts and leaders in this field, a lot based on evidence-based practices as well as their years of experience to bring this in. So Jean, let's start with you. And we should be seeing you, your image pop up, so you should be in control of your slides here in a moment. But until they get there, I'll show your picture and go to your first slide.
Thank you. Thank you, Cordelia and Joan, for inviting me. I've been looking forward to sharing what we've learned here with your large audience. It's wonderful to see so many people have joined and are interested in this topic that's near and dear to my heart. As you shared, it was a great introduction. So much of what is thought of in terms of sexual behavior of youth is based on fear and myths, and it's part of my mission to help share what we know and, as Joan pointed out earlier, bringing in hope to how to help these youth and help people make good decisions for their care. So I'm a mom in addition to a professor and psychologist, and I have a 15-year-old and an 8-year-old, and can readily share that I would love for sexual development to start in, about 24 as opposed to in early childhood. But the reality is what we know about children is that sexual development is part of their development from very early on, and it's not a unique or unusual part of their development, but actually can be readily understood by understanding their cognitive and social and motor and language development. And really what is expected as typical or normal for children makes sense if we can step out of the taboo and fear of thoughts about sex and kids and thinking about these are youth who are trying to understand their body, understand where they fit in the world, and how do they relate, because we are social beings. So I'm going to start with talking some bit about what we know about typical sexual development. The types of behavior that occurs among children when it's something typical rather than concerning or harmful often is triggered by curiosity. They're trying to figure out the world or their body or understand differences and similarities. They're learning about the world. Their language is developing. Very often they'll utilize words that they don't quite know what they mean, but they've heard and it's been repeated, and they're trying to figure out the meaning of it. Sometimes they see shock value associated with it, so they repeat it. That becomes alarming to adults where they hear kids using these more adult terminology. But oftentimes they don't even know what it means. I reflect on a situation where we had a young child come in and said that she had sex on the playground. And that was very concerning, of course, to all of us. But when we inquired, what does sex mean? She said, you kiss on the lips. So that helped us understand that the language they use are not necessarily the same meaning of the terms that we are thinking as adults, and the importance to inquire and really look at what might be behind language and behaviors. Oftentimes they're mimicking things they've seen, they've heard, and one of the things to think about when multiple kids are involved in the sexual behavior is who started it and what were the thoughts and feelings of those involved. When it's typical sexual development, the children involved are in agreement for the behaviors. Young kids can't consent. They don't have the capacity to truly consent. But there's no dissent. There's no pushing back, high negative emotions associated when it's a more typical sexual behavior. Now we live in the age of technology, And that sort of makes things a lot more confusing when trying to figure out what is typical and what is problematic. And I'll probably show my age with some of my examples, but when I was a child and I didn't know something, I would ask my parents or look it up in a book. I didn't have access to such information at our fingertips that we have now. But now even preschool children, young kids, can get questions answered, look up facts on their fingertips, on their phones, on their devices of tablets and so forth. And what information that you can have. The difficulty is it's also access to things that aren't appropriate for young children. And it's difficult to make it a safe harbor for their development. So when a 10-year-old was curious when I was a child, they might sneak in a magazine and giggle and share it. But now they have access to the entire internet and can access very violent, inappropriate behaviors. What does that do then impact to what would have been a typical or normal behavior? Whereas mooning, flashing, and so forth may have happened in a young child in an innocent way, now youth take pictures of everything. They take pictures of their food, they take pictures of their fingers, they take pictures of where they are, and they take pictures of their body, and they share it. And while it may have been the same motivation of mooning or flashing 20 years ago, there is implications to their sharing that can hinder them long term and could be illegal behaviors and cause them to be involved with juvenile justice or the criminal system. It's normal for kids, particularly in the middle school age, to tease and joke and struggle with developing relationships and how to communicate. But now they do this on social media. It spreads like wildfire. And that then impacts how other people are reacting to them. So we're in the age where what's typical becomes much more complicated because of the access to technology. The process of growing up involves learning about relationships, how to communicate, how to nurture, how to have intimate relationships in a healthy way. And as much as parents would love for kids to be born with all that knowledge, they learn from experience, from modeling and so forth. And some youth are in need of extra support through that process. Youth that are naturally impulsive, active, have language problems, or do not have natural healthy examples of this will need more support as they're growing up. There's multiple factors that can facilitate healthy development of relationships through modeling, through caregiver, teacher, coach, providing guidance, supervision, monitoring, supporting folks to the children to practice good communication skills, good boundaries, respect each other's privacy. There's multiple times all of us as professionals and public that we can reinforce kids making good decisions, communicate about their thoughts and feelings, and prevent exposure to traumatic situations. This will lead them to have healthier relationships, healthier sexual development, and make better decisions. There isn't one clear guideline that can say this behavior is typical versus this behavior is problematic or harmful. Instead, we encourage you as professionals to get details of situations and think through what kinds of things would indicate that this behavior is more concerning, problematic, or harmful rather than typical. So on your slide on the right side, there are some clear behaviors right away you would know this is a problem. Intrusive behaviors, behaviors that involve force, intimidation, coercion, behaviors in which some of the children are experiencing fear, anxiety. Any of those would clearly indicate this is a behavior that's harmful, problematic, and in need of intervention. Other times as you're looking at the developmental appropriateness and frequency of the behaviors. So playing doctor or sexual play can happen every once in a while. If an adult finds out, typically the child responds with hearing that information, making better decisions in the future. it would cross the line to be more concerning and problematic if they continue the behavior at a high frequency, if it becomes preoccupying, if it doesn't respond to parental intervention, if it interferes with being able to do typical other kinds of child play. And then also looking at the age and development level of the kids involved with the behavior. So typical sex play occurs among children who know each other, would play together already, are of similar size, cognitive development, etc. When you get diversion in there in terms of chronological age, cognitive abilities, physical size, you become more concerning that one of the youth is having power or control or having a negative impact on the other youth through those behaviors. There is not a single age that I would say that is a demarcation. It's really evaluating the functioning of the children involved and how much should they be playing together already and reacting in a way that they're all in agreement versus it being something of concern in terms of who has the power and control. One of the myths about these problematic sexual behavior is that only children who've been sexually abused demonstrate problematic sexual behavior. So if a youth has this, they must have been abused. The reality is certainly sexual abuse is a significant risk factor, and you need to be concerned in terms of if a child's demonstrating it, finding out where they may have learned it. I caution you in not assuming, though, that there was sexual abuse. There's a number of studies that show a large portion of kids with problematic sexual behavior have no clear history of sexual abuse. There are aspects of sexual abuse that increase the risk, so being abused at a younger age, preschool age, being abused by multiple people, being abused in a way that is intrusive in terms of things like penetration, are higher risk of then developing problematic sexual behavior. Most youth with a sexual abuse history do not develop problematic sexual behavior. There are other factors in the environment in terms of exposure to sexualized material that can contribute or impact to the development of problematic sexual behavior. So if you're exposed to materials, again, on the internet and the media in terms of pornography, if you're exposed to behavior among older siblings or adults, sexual behavior, all of that could influence as a model of a behavior that then gets repeated in a problematic way. Interestingly, models of coercion has been found to have a significant relationship to development of problematic sexual behavior. So youth that are exposed to harsh parenting, physical abuse, domestic violence, violence in the community, have models of using force coercion as a way to problem solve or manage situations, who have been raised in a situation with lots of tension and violence, are more likely to invade boundaries and break sexual behavior rules or have problematic sexual behavior. So that is a significant risk factor. There are individual vulnerabilities that I mentioned earlier, youth that have impulsiveness, attention problems, language difficulties, have then fewer coping resources to manage and make good decisions and are more vulnerable to having problematic sexual behavior. And then also thinking about any factors that take a caregiver away from being able to provide the modeling, guidance, and supervision that help children learn how to follow rules, can thus impact the development of problematic sexual behavior, such as parents who are depressed, who are involved in substances, who are working multiple jobs, who are otherwise unavailable for the youth. I think it's always important to think about protective factors when we're talking about the flip of risk factors. So realizing when you can provide healthy boundaries and support and model those, protect kids from harm and trauma, provide guidance and supervision, but also enhance their ability to cope, to use words when they're having strong feelings rather than using physical or negative responses, developing healthy peer relationships and good friends, and being able to communicate about their feelings and feel good about their own accomplishments. Those are protective factors that, despite even risky situations, can help them be able to manage that and make good decisions and support their healthy development. As you probably can hear from this conversation already, the role of caregivers and others adults in their life make a huge difference for positive outcomes. There's been a number of studies of children with problematic sexual behavior and what aspects of treatment are related to the best outcomes, and caregivers are very key. In fact, are the strongest impact on the child's being able to reduce and eliminate problematic sexual behavior. So direct involvement in the caregivers in supervision, parenting skills, increasing positive behavior, reducing negative behavior, having open communication and ability to answer questions about sex, support boundaries, and prevent abuse are key for positive outcomes for these youth. Well, those 15 minutes went by fast. I hope that was helpful and on target for what you were looking for.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Jane. And yes, it's amazing how quickly 15 minutes can go. But that was really, I always learn so much from talking with you and hearing you speak, so thank you. One question we had both for the audience and also would like to ask you as well is, like, what messages do you think help engage caregivers in this type of work, since you emphasize the importance of caregivers? So just to the audience, if you can just also think about what messages have you found help caregivers, and maybe Jane, we can also have you think about that question as well.
Great, and just everyone, please go ahead and write in your text chat what messages can help engage caregivers into our about healthy sexuality. Let's go ahead and get some people entering their chats.
Great, and some of the answers already. Something is that I think again Jessica was saying a very positive message that sexual abuse is preventable. Instilling hope that your child can heal, so that if a parent coming forward, they can hear that their intervention actually will make a difference. Be able to do so without judgment, and also just the both compassion as well as hope. And if you don't teach your children about healthy sexual development, who will? So that's a really wonderful question to add in there. A few others, and I'll turn it back to you, Jane. Is just talking openly about all kinds of sexual behavior problems as well as healthy sexuality. So not being afraid of either one, but the impact that can have. Also, sexual abuse happens to everyone, making sure that it's clear that this is not something that just happens to people from other walks of life. And exploring the values that you might want to teach a child, understanding the issue in a general way so that you're actually avoiding any blame and shame. So I'm wondering, just given all these that are coming in, Jane, what else would you want to, messages do you think you have found been helpful to engage caregivers in this type of work?
These answers are fantastic and broad and hit a lot of the things. We have a parent partnership board who helps guide our work, and they would echo what is said here about things that are very important. The other thing that I would add is to put on the table when you start the conversation that this is a hard topic. And there are lots of things that make it a difficult topic, and that it's okay that there's hesitancy around it. And like some of the folks have said, is they are really the key to helping their child be able to know accurate information. For example, that one comment, where are they going to go if they don't go to you? Are they going to get inaccurate information from others? And that they are the key to helping them be able to get the accurate information. And it's okay if the parents don't have it. They can say, that's a great question. I will go and find some information and get back to you. The kids want to have this conversation with the parents. And so being able to have that experience with the parents that's successful helps with then future conversation as they go through adolescence.
Great. Thank you, Jane. I think without further ado, I think what we'll do is we'll turn this actually over to you, Michelle. Really thank you, Jane, so much for that really fantastic presentation, and looking forward to hearing your words as well, Michelle. So we can turn this to you, and you now have control over your slides.
Great, thank you. So I want to start by thanking Joan, Cordelia, and the Power in Prevention for inviting me to speak today. It's very exciting to see so many in attendance today. It's important to not only National Children's Alliance, but a national work group that we have looking at this issue, and I know Jane's group, that we're able to spread this information. So we view today as an opportunity for us to do that. Okay, so National Children's Alliance, for those of you who may not be familiar, we're a membership organization of children's advocacy centers and state chapters. And so children's advocacy centers provide for a coordinated investigation of child abuse allegations in a way that is very child-focused and involves key partners. And so partners are law enforcement, county attorney's offices or prosecutors, medical providers, mental health providers, child protection services, victims advocates, and then our Children's Advocacy Center staff. Our Children's Advocacy Centers, we have 822 across the United States, and during 2016, 325,000 children received services from a Children's Advocacy Center. It's important for NCA, because we are a membership organization, to know what our member centers need, and so we kind of keep a pulse on what's going on in the field and identify education that is needed. And that is really where this training initiative started for National Children's Alliance. We had been at some meetings with some of our children's advocacy centers, and our advocacy centers were saying that children with problematic sexual behaviors were coming through their doors, and they did not feel that they had the resources or training to do the best they could with this population. So National Children's Alliance at that point looked for some funding, and we were fortunate to receive funding through American Legion. And so at that point, we formed a national work group. NCA likes to use a national work group model because it allows for individuals across the country to participate on our national work groups. And so instead of just having the same core people work on certain issues, we're able to really expand that, and people can self-refer or sign up for our national work group. Jane is actually the co-chair of that work group, and so we appreciate all of the work and dedication that she has done. So in identifying the need, we always look at data to inform. So not just going off what we think, but we also want to see if the data is going to inform us on that. And so what we know is, and it can change depending on the year, but somewhere between 20 and 25% of all cases that were referred to a Children's Advocacy Center in 2016, actually, I have the 2016 data now, were alleged offenses by youth under the age of 18. So if we keep in mind that we have that 325,000 kids who were served, that means that we could be talking about approximately 65,000 kids who were identifying that the offense or the alleged offense was committed by a youth under the age of 18. We also do a census every other year, and so what our census showed was that 12.4% of our CACs reported having some training in problematic sexual behavior, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of the treatments for children with problematic sexual behaviors. So when we look at the number of occurrences with the training that it was out in the field, we absolutely knew that it was a need for the CACs. So at that point, as I said, we had a national work group that was put together, and we developed a video training series and also some fact sheets that we'll talk about, and we've also been doing some webinars. The next webinar that is scheduled is August 24th, and that is primarily geared towards mental health providers, and is going to look at trauma-focused CBT, which is used by about 80% of our centers, and problematic sexual behavior, cognitive behavioral therapy. And if anybody has any questions about that, Jane is the expert, and she's on the phone. So let me switch. I always get talking and forget to switch my slides. Okay. So what we know from our census information, and this isn't just specific to problematic sexual behaviors, but just in general for serving children who have significant trauma histories, that 24% of our centers rated that they had low availability to qualified mental health providers. And then another 13.9% cited that they lacked specified training and technical assistance. So again, that's the reason we do have several training initiatives for mental health providers to try to meet this need. And then client barriers, we're always looking at client barriers because we can have trained clinicians, but we also want to look at what might be making it difficult for clients to get into care. And so CACs were reporting that 30.2% were not following up or dropping out of treatment prematurely. So to talk about the video training series, this is very exciting. It actually launched on January 31st, and there were several content experts that were involved in the development of the video training series. This is something that is free of charge and can be accessed by the National Children's Alliance webpage, and I think they were going to put that in the text box, but it's nationalchildren'salliance.org/PSB. And so you will be able to register free of charge. Each of the 4 modules are about 30 minutes in length. And then after you complete a module, you'll have a quiz. So there's a quiz for each one of the learning modules. And then at the end, there is an evaluation, which we very much appreciate the feedback. And after completing the evaluation, you will be able to print your certificate of completion. So the first module is an overview of youth with problematic sexual behaviors. Let me advance my slide. And so this will give information on the differences between typical sexual play behavior and problematic or potentially illegal sexual behavior. It will have information on the prevalence of problematic sexual behavior, discuss risk and protective factors associated with it, and also common misconceptions about youth with problematic sexual behaviors. The second module is special consideration for children's advocacy centers. And so if somebody's interested in video training series and you're not with the Children's Advocacy Center, we definitely would encourage you to watch this module. But if you decided that you didn't want to, this module could be skipped. But I think it's also an important module. There was the misconception that Children's Advocacy Centers could not serve children with problematic sexual behaviors because of the old view, which we're trying to change, that they were offenders. And so our standards clearly state that these children can be served in a Children's Advocacy Center. And so this module specifically will talk about the CAC mission and standards that support teams seeing children with problematic sexual behaviors, and then the infrastructure that is needed in order to ensure safety for all. That would be the child with the problematic sexual behavior as well as other youth. And then also to look at what other CACs have done in terms of providing evidence-supported services to this population. The third module is treatment responses. So this module is going to provide information on the effective components of treatments for problematic sexual behaviors as found in research. You'll also learn about the unique and overlapping components of treatment of problematic sexual behaviors and trauma symptoms, and then understanding the research-based support for the model, and understanding the components that are appropriate to assessment. And our fourth and final module in this video training series is community engagement, which is really important when putting together a program for serving this population. And it talks about barriers that communities may face when dealing with youth with problematic sexual behaviors, roles and responsibilities of the multidisciplinary team. And so I had identified members of the multidisciplinary team, which are law enforcement, prosecutors, medical, mental health, CPS, victims advocacy, children's advocacy center staff. And then with this particular group, there may be additional partners, which could be like probation and members from the judicial system. And so also this module will provide information on lessons learned from communities where PSB interventions have been successfully implemented, and then the importance of focusing on the family and engaging caregivers to successful outcomes. So the other resource that was created, and again we had several content experts from our national work group who were involved in writing the fact sheets. And so we have 3 fact sheets. And again, that web address that I gave you will provide you access to our fact sheets. You can also email me if you would like me to send you a print file. You can print as many as you would like. What I'm hearing from CACs and people in the community is it's best to print 1 because it's kind of a color hog on your printer, and then take it to maybe a copying store to make the other copies. So the fact sheets that we have here are overview of youth with problematic sexual behavior. This is one of our popular ones because it can be used with parents, but also community members, maybe a legislator or a judge or just anyone that you're wanting to know more about youth with problematic sexual behaviors. Our second one is children's advocacy centers. And so this is specific to children's advocacy centers and actually is a little bit longer fact sheet than the other 2. And then the caregivers fact sheet is also very popular. We get a lot of requests. It's very nicely written and gives that message of hope for caregivers and provides information on things like, how to keep children safe in their home, setting sexual behavior rules, supervision, and then treatment options for their child. So you can see on the bottom there the 3 fact sheets, and so the what we can do is for the that one is for that's considered our overview one, and then what happens now is for parents. And where we begin is the fact sheet for children's advocacy centers. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Michelle. And I forgot that we have the National Center on the Sexual Behavior of Youth website next as a resource. So part of the work that I do is am directing the National Center on the Sexual Behavior of Youth. And one of our missions is to address the myths of parents and professionals and be able to provide accurate information of the best ways to identify and respond to these youth. And so on our website we have resources for the parents, for professionals, we have a bibliography, we have links to other websites, there's a number of fact sheets. So I hope that you will visit this website. There's also a place for comments, so if there's things that you would like to see added, let us know. We take those comments very seriously as we're revising the website over time.
Great.
I want to go back to, this is Cordelia, and I just want to say I'm completely offline. I've had technical shutdown here. So I haven't been able to follow the chat and questions for you, but I'm sure David and Joan have been. But we want to start the questions after all this great information. Michelle, going back to you with the, I believe there's a slide, although I can't see the slide. So you trust me on this, or somebody can catch up with me on it, with how can we get the resources out to the field and caregivers? And for the audience, please chat in your ideas, because even though I can't see it, others there can. And what's so important with this new information, all these wonderful resources, is that people know about them. Webinar and trainings will help. But what other ideas do you have about ways to get those out? And Michelle, maybe you can start while people are putting their ideas in the chat with just what ideas you have about how we can get resources out to the field and to caregivers.
Sure. Okay, so as I said, we have a national work group on the youth with problematic sexual behaviors, and the national work group has really been trying to brainstorm some ways of getting these resources out. So we've talked about professional organizations as a way of trying to get the resources out, also conferences, when members of the national work group are at conferences trying to get the information out that way. We have sent email blasts from the National Children's Alliance webpage, and we sent every member CAC a package that had information on the video training series, as well as copies of all of the fact sheets. So it is really important. To date, we've had 200 people complete the video training series, and so we're pleased with that, but we really want to get it out to more community members, agencies, and so I look to this group for some good suggestions on that.
And Cordelia, I can read what's coming through.
Great.
So just there's been
Thank
some
you.
great suggestions, which is, the foster parent meetings and trainings, church youth and ministry leaders. The people are talking about, special trainings that might be for parents and teachers, asking school districts to post them, health fairs, meetings, conferences. A couple of people have mentioned SART teams, the sexual assault response team, and one in particular has started holding a community coffee hour where they have tables and information set up. So send links out in existing newsletters, especially for parents. And school nurses has also been mentioned, and getting the information to schools, and particularly, getting to schools, not just high school, but like really pushing to have this kind of information down at the middle school, elementary school level. So there's been some great suggestions here, and I think, that one thing that, that people think about is that if you look to this information and you find it useful, may I sort of be aggressive enough to say that, please share that with some of the other folks that you know out in the world, since that can be very helpful.
And I want to start the discussion off, but I'll buy Joan a little bit more time to look at all the chat there, and with people that are experiencing barriers to being able to either provide services or adapt prevention materials to work with these children. Jane, do you have any helpful hints for what might help people to get past those barriers in their agencies or in their communities so that they are more open to using the resources available and doing this work?
So that I understand, being able to have the professionals in the community willing to take in the information and then utilize it with caregivers.
Right. Yeah, and whether it's prevention or services. I mean, even CICs, you talked about the kind of myth there, or do we work with victims, but we don't work with these kids who've caused harm. And our prevention is preventing victimization, so we don't have our messages here. Any tips about how we get around that?
I think that the fact that acknowledging the myths are out there and being able to find a way to join on the goals, and I would think all of us can join on the goals that we want all kids safe, and that being able to have a dialogue in terms of how do we help all kids be safe, and be able to talk about the myths associated that these youth are not necessarily going to grow up in the way that they may be thinking about and have serious, if they are able to get support and help. And ask them if they're willing to hear information and provide the fact sheets through NCA, fact sheets that are also through the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and the National Center on the Sexual Behavior of Youth. In addition, what a lot of teams have done is show those videos, which are only about 20 minutes long, in a large group with time for discussion. And so they're seeing different experts dispel these myths and then have an opportunity to discuss, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to the children in our community? How might we want to use this information to do things different in what we're doing? That can be done with parents, foster parents, multidisciplinary team, schools. I saw lots of people really wanting to engage schools, so getting the counselors, the teachers, and others on board so their myths are dispelled and they can have a way to approach the youth and families.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. And just, Cordelia, since you can't read, I can pull a couple of the questions from the chat that have appeared so far. So I guess maybe going to you, Michelle, just that one of the questions that came up earlier was that, are you partnering with organizations that are addressing serious emotional disturbances as well, given that, that some of the CACs may not have the experience to deal with all the different kinds of issues that a child is presenting. So I'm wondering if you have a way that you have been either partnering or just an answer to that question.
Sure. So many of our children's advocacy centers, I'd like to say all of them, I think it's a pretty high percentage, partner with many different organizations and agencies within their own community. And so when we look at the number of CACs that are providing their own mental health versus using what we call linkage agreements or tapping into resources within the community, only about a third of our CACs exclusively provide it within the CAC, and even with that would probably refer to a mental health agency if the child would be better served. So when you look at the community level with children's advocacy centers, they're generally pretty connected to the resources within their area.
Great, thank you. And maybe you could also just, Michelle, speak to a couple of people have been asking about the videos that you mentioned and how maybe people might access those. I wonder if you could speak to that for a moment as well.
Sure. So on the National Children's Alliance website, well, actually a better way to get to it is if you type in nationalchildren'salliance.org/PSB, and then partway down the page, you're going to see a bar that says Go to Training. And so what you'll do is you'll just click on that, and what it's going to do is take you to a different site. And so once you get to that site, you will just enter your information. As I said, it's free of charge, but it will give you an account so that it'll keep track if you only watch a portion and you want to go back to it. So that is how you get to the video training series, and it's the exact same link that will get you to our fact sheets. And then my email address, in case anybody wants me to send them a print file by email, is mmiller@nca-online.org. And so if you want to make more fact sheets to hand out, the print file is a good option, although you could also download from the web page.
And just so people know, I did. This is David. I just posted that link into the text chat.
Great.
Great. And we also will be at the very end. We'll have everybody's email and contact information. So if you didn't get that from Michelle, you'll have to stay to the end, and you'll be able to get them or get the file. Jane, I'm just curious. One of the questions that also came forward is that as you're talking about that basically I think you've shared a very positive message about children with sexual behavior problems won't necessarily continue with those behaviors over time. And one of the questions that came up was, what length of time have you been collecting data on these children with sexual behavior problems? So what kind of longitudinal data are you pulling from?
Thanks, Joan. So the original randomized clinical trial was conducted by Dr. Barbara Bonner in the mid-90s. And then a student of mine, Melissa Carpentier, Mark Chaffin, and I, 10 years later, match them in child welfare, juvenile justice, and adult criminal databases to look at what was the recidivism rate. And of those youth that were randomly assigned to the cognitive behavioral group, the PSB-CBT, the rate of recidivism was 2%. It was much and significantly lower than the comparison group, which was a play therapy approach, and was similar to youth who at the time of the randomized clinical trial had no problematic sexual behavior but had some general behavior problems. Their long-term rate was 3%.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And this is a question for both of you, but starting with Michelle. Just is that I think that you know, one of the questions that came forward is like, you know, what age is appropriate for starting to teach a child about body parts, and then also the second part is that, and when do you also start introducing the question about teaching a child about sex? So maybe Michelle will start with you, and then go to Jane with the same question.
Yeah, actually I'm going to defer to Jane because I think she'll do a better
Sure.
job with that one. Thank you.
You know, I would say from the time they start learning words about head, shoulders, knees, and toes, you can teach them also about their buttocks and their penis and their vagina and other terms in a matter-of-fact way. And for example, when they're changing or in the bath, to making sure all their body parts are clean. At the same time, teaching things about privacy and modesty. A lot of parents, I live in the South, are concerned about their kids going to school and talking about things like penises. So being able also to share these are your body parts. It's also a topic that we talk with mom and dad and other trusted adults, but you don't talk to friends about. So it'd be part of a range of discussion. And then in terms of talking about how babies are born and relationships, is taking into account those individual child's capacity to understand. And so you could talk about how babies are born in as early as 6, 7, 8 years old, but in a pretty concrete ways. It's hard for them to visualize things like eggs and sperm, and that won't make a lot of sense to them, but will make sense as they get older. And in that, also talking about not just those body parts and functions, but relationships and values and decision-making and intimacy and integrating that, not as a long lecture, but as a way that's a natural part of the conversation. And sometimes, in fact, our Parent Partnership Board recommend bringing it up when things come up naturally in the media and song lyrics and other kinds of situations, asking your child, what do you think about that? Do you think that's an okay thing? Is it an okay thing for a kid? And just modeling an open conversation to talk about these issues.
That's great, Jane, and thank you. And you know, one of our somebody just wrote in that also it's like, you know, adults sometimes get nervous and say too much. So just begin to, you know, to find out what the child is asking and answer that question. Don't feel like you have to give the whole lecture all at once. Because any of us who are parents know that the child tends to not listen to the whole lecture, but they will listen for whatever answer comes to their particular question. And I think in particular what I love is that I think it was the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center says that probably the most important thing is that by having those conversations you become askable, so that it may not be the question, you know, by having that conversation, they may, you know, they may not even be listening that much, but that you're making it really clear that you're someone that the child can talk to, and that's such a key message, I think, to be giving in addition to the actual information.
I like that you were, when you were talking earlier about just acknowledging that all of these discussions are difficult for people. And I think just building on what you're saying there, if parents find, because parents will often say, well, I got embarrassed or I got uncomfortable or awkward. And the more we acknowledge that as parents, or the fact that we don't know the answer, some of the current terms, the way language changes, to say, I'm going to find that out, that it's okay to say and modeling, saying, you know, I got embarrassed when you asked that, I got awkward, but I'm so glad you did. And that doesn't mean I don't want to talk about it. I can talk about it, but sometimes I get embarrassed or uncomfortable. And just giving them pathways forward. So we're human, and depending on how we were raised and how much we've talked about this, it can be uncomfortable, and it can be uncomfortable to be asked something by a child that we don't know how to answer. We either literally don't know the answer to it, or we're taken back for a minute and just need to buy ourselves a little time to say, let me think about that, or let me look it up, or what do you think, as you said before, being very useful to get an idea of where that question's coming from.
Great, and it's interesting to add on that Judy Larson asked, so we teach the word vagina, but that involves penetration, so why don't we emphasize vulva as the external genitalia of females? And wondering, Jane, if you have any thoughts about that as well.
I was looking at that same question, Joan, and was hoping you would ask me about that. Yes, fantastic. Why don't we talk about clitoris? Why don't we talk about all our body parts? And it's our own uncomfortableness as adults. And so I think it is helpful to be able to help children, again, understand all their body parts and their functions. And the more that we are comfortable and matter-of-fact about it, the less it becomes a taboo, scary kind of thing.
I just have to jump in again there. I'm sorry, this is Cordelia, but I remember being out of spot, speaking of those uncomfortable times when we had TV cameras on for the news and we were teaching a public show with a play, and a little boy, I was talking about body parts, and this boy said, "Oh, a vulva. My dad has a green one." And it was just going back to, and we had asked earlier about a fender, and the same little boy said, "Yeah, that's a thing on a car. I know what that means." So, both good times to check in and see what they're thinking.
Can I make one more comment about this? Is that I think when we talk to parents about talking to their kids about this, it raises their anxiety so much that starting the conversation by having them talk about how they learned and what did they like about it and what was not so good about it, and having a dialogue about that makes them less anxious to think about how they want it different for their kids.
Oh, great point.
So one, just a maybe more difficult question, emotionally, I think that some of the educators. So here, it's like, how do we feel? So how do we sort of take the emotional rage that we feel from children involved in incest, and to a new normal of the proper methods that we are entering as as notes. So just wondering if that's something that you could speak to as well, Jane. And
I'm not sure I understand the question completely. I absolutely understand that the problematic behavior can be harmful, and we never want to minimize the seriousness of the behavior and acknowledge that emotional impact, trauma that can be experienced by these behaviors, and making sure we have focused this on the kid with problematic sexual behavior, but we need to make sure all family members' needs are met, and most critically the child victims. But I'm not sure if that's what this comment is trying to address.
Yeah. So, Monica, if that answers your question, let us know, and if not, we can return to that. Another question, and Michelle, I'm not sure if this is something you feel comfortable with, is that when the person asks that primary prevention is so important, and if you have any advice about how to bring up primary prevention in this sort of context as well, that would be helpful. Michelle, do you want to answer that, or should we throw that back to Jane as well?
So I'll start, and then we can throw it to Jane. I mean, I think any prevention is important, and I think primary prevention definitely is important. And so whether it's, pediatricians when kids go in for well child checks, or just trying to disseminate information, I think that is critical, especially like Jane said, there's so much access anymore through the internet, and so kids are having access. So any opportunity for prevention, I think, is really helpful to all kids.
I like, Michelle, that you brought up a wide audience. I think sometimes we put the whole weight of the prevention on the kids themselves. And there are efforts in the sexual abuse prevention to include information in terms of that it's not okay to touch other children, and help them understand the general rules of privacy and boundaries. but doctors, caregivers in terms of monitoring what they're access to and being able to recognize themselves that when they're thinking about abuse prevention, it's not just stranger danger and it's not just adults we know. It can be other youth. And so making decisions about babysitters and unsupervised time with other youth and thinking about how we can prevent these incidents from occurring by giving good information about safety.
Excuse me, we're getting another voice, and I'm going to just mute all the lines and ask speakers to unmute their lines at star 96. So just 1 second. Star 6, so I'm going to just mute all lines.
All guests have been muted. You can unmute your line by pressing star 6.
Great. So speakers, if you press star 6 to mute your phone. So Joan, are you back on?
I hope so. Am I?
You are. And Jane, are you back on?
I am.
And Michelle?
Yes.
And Cordelia?
Can you hear me?
They are great. We got rid of the other extra sound.
Okay, and this is Cordelia, and I wanted to ask, and I'm not sure if I should start with Jane or Michelle, so instead of calling your name, could you maybe just think about this? And I wanted, going back to one of Joan's opening quotes that she heard, you know, when you have a parent that's just horrified and embarrassed and angry about the behavior that their child engaged in, what have you found that's useful to help them? And on the flip side of that, when parents completely minimize the impact, what have you found that's useful? Who would like to take that first?
I'll take a lead, and then Michelle can chime in too. One piece is good old reflective listening, being with them, allowing them to share their story, reflecting that, hearing what is it about the situation makes it particularly upsetting for them. Is it their own trauma history? Is it their fear about their future? What is it about it that is most hurtful, distressing for them? Because it's different for different individuals. And then request permission to share what is known. So, for example, they might have this assumption that this means there's no hope for my child. They're going to grow up to be a pedophile. And then being able to offer, to provide what we know about these youth and what makes effective treatment and how to support them. And then on the turn in terms of the caregivers who have a hard time understanding and believing it, normalizing that. And I would ask everybody on this call, what would you do if someone knocked on your door and said your child raped another child? I think most of us, our initial reaction is that you have this wrong. There's no way my child would do that. And so being able to normalize it, this would be very hard for any parent to believe or understand, and what's their understanding of it, and depending on where they are in the investigation, sharing what is known and acknowledging how hard that is. The other thing I will note that we hear from parents is the importance of being with other parents who've been through this experience. So we do the program as a group approach in large part to address the social isolation and reaction so that they can be with other parents. And the parents have shared how much that has helped them heal, to hear hope from other parents and to be affirmed that they're not alone and to believe in their children. Not everybody has an opportunity to be part of group, and our Parent Partnership Board is creating a newsletter for parents that we'll be posting on our website. NERI has a similar project going on. So there are efforts. Stop It Now has had some things on their website to help with a parent-to-parent connection by getting information and stories from other parents. So linking the parents to those resources to help them be able to cope and adjust to the situation.
I mean, that actually might just, if I can just join in, jump in, and just like Jane, that reminds me, like, the first time when I was working with Stop It Now, we had a parent meeting, and these are parents of children who had problematic sexual behaviors. And I just remember one of the moms saying it was the first time that she had been able to talk about her son with other parents and have that be something that she both was comfortable with and that felt normal. And I think about all the ways that, as parents, we share, everything from, potty training to, breastfeeding, diapering, whatever else with other parents, and if all of a sudden you have to cut off all of that contact and support, that it really was an incredibly emotional evening to have these parents for the first time be able to just share their experiences. So I would just like to echo how important that is.
And Michelle, do you have anything to add?
I do. So with parents, I think that when there's disbelief and when there may be minimizing, a lot of times that's born out of fears that the parents have. A lot of times parents have that instinct to protect their child, and so there can be a fear that if they talk about it, that in some way, not knowing what the ramifications are going to be from the legal system. So I liked what Jane said as far as having the conversation, doing the reflective listening to find out what the caregiver's fears are, and then definitely providing information and letting caregivers know as best as you can that they don't need to manage this in isolation. And then definitely the normalizing and instilling hope. I had a parent that reached out to me 2 weeks ago and has a situation with a son who has problematic sexual behavior. And through Jane's help, I was able to give her contact information for someone who has the specialized training. And she said that it was the best email that she had received in months. And just the fact that she knew that there were resources, that there was help available, just made her feel so much better, simply by making that connection and then having somebody respond with some resources.
Great. That's
Those are wonderful ideas and responses. Thank you.
So I think maybe this might be a good time for us to go with what we call sort of our takeaway. And this is something which we asked each of the speakers to also say, like, what's one thing that you actually learned today that you've been taking away with us? So, Michelle, what you learned from Jane's talk, and Jane, what you learned from Michelle's. And also just wanted to ask the people who are listening as well in the chat room, if you say, like, what's your takeaway as well? So maybe start with Jane, if you maybe say what's one takeaway you have from what Michelle talked about today.
Well, I'd like to say two. One is the resources of child advocacy centers and how many there are across the nation and how many children are served. I knew at some level, but I don't think I knew the magnitude and how that is an important resource to other professionals in the community to make changes in their community. And then the second one is accessing resources and having a voice in what other resources are developed, such as through the work group and other resources.
Great. And Michelle, what's a takeaway that you would say from Jane? And again, the audience would love to hear what your thoughts are as well, what you have as a key takeaway from today.
Sure. So I always learn from Jane. I love working with her, and she's so eloquent in the way that she puts things. But really today, how she described having conversation with children, ways that caregivers can have conversations, and looking at the developmental stage of the child in determining the appropriateness, of that conversation. So that was very helpful. And then for the group, I just really appreciate, because we do want to get these resources out, and I kind of view this as an opportunity to have more messengers to go to their communities, to go to their teams, to their organizations. And so one thing that kind of surprises me, but was very good, is we did not have schools on our list as far as looking at a school organization that we can try to get this information sent out through. So I really appreciated the list, and in particular the reminder that absolutely schools are very important.
And was there anything else to add, Joan, from what the comments are that people have written in for what takeaways are coming up for people?
Yeah, definitely. Some people, I think everything from getting the proper help, that help is available, just understanding that, the sense of hope, and particularly that, cognitive behavioral therapy, it's just like there's such a low recidivism rate. And I think that, all of the, the fact sheets, the web resources, so the sharing of sort of the different program strategies that people are focusing on, and sharing both that the two speakers have shared, but also that have been sharing back and forth in the chat comes up. And I think that putting all those together, I think that just shows up just the, I think at least for me, just that the wealth of information that's there now compared to what there was just 5 years ago is just phenomenal. And that's a lot thanks to to work at Michelle that your organization has done to get the funding, and from working with Jane so well. So there's really, I think that's a piece that echoes over and over again here.
That is very impressive and very hopeful. And we also want to ask the audience and each of our presenters, what's one thing you're really taking away from today? And I think it might be inherent in a number of the things that you just heard from Joan and Jane and Michelle. But Prevent Connect feels very strongly, as do we, about the importance of we've taken valuable time. We've pulled together wonderful presenters, and we want to make sure, we want to know what really stands out. What are you taking away? Who are you going to run and talk to? What are you going to download right away? What do you want to do with this information? So if you could be entering take one action you really want to take as a result of today, I would like to ask each of our speakers. I'll start with Michelle, because I know she just said adding schools, and I don't know if you want to hang on to that or if you want to add anything else.
Well, and the other thing is when I was looking at the list of attendees, there were a lot of names that I didn't know. And so we know this, but it's great to see the interest that extends even beyond our children's advocacy centers, right? Professionals in the community, different groups of professionals, that there's definite commitment and interest to serving these youth.
Great. And how about you, Jane?
I'll echo what Michelle has said in terms of the wide range of the audience and obvious interest and motivation. I'm looking at the comments, a number of people have talked about the need to collaborate with Child Protective Services, schools, law enforcement, et cetera. And it reaffirms for me that this is not something that we just train clinicians and things will get better. It is really needing to talk with everybody, professionals, families, and being able to look at what we're doing and how to make it better.
Excellent point. Joan, what are you seeing in the chat for take actions? Is it all?
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot coming in. I think that people are like that. Currently working closely with schools in Middlebury, Vermont, and we'll use materials and share resources with students and staff. A big, huge thank you. The fact sheets and training and resources for state guidelines and sexual health and rape prevention. So there's a whole lot of ways that people are talking about using the materials. The coworker and I are working on getting information out to parents electronically into school websites. So that's definitely resonating here with a lot of people. And I'm just sort of downloading the fact sheets I share with family and coworkers and colleagues in the area. So those are just some of there's lots of them coming through, Cordelia, and I think it's really exciting that people are finding this information so so useful for their current work. And I think I don't know, Jane and Michelle, if you've seen, there's also just a lot of sharing back and forth particularly around prevention, which given our Prevent Connect focus on prevention, it's wonderful to see that people are seeing that this is these are really, this younger age group is really an ideal time for prevention, particularly with a new focus that you bring to the table.
Yeah, I've been looking up some of these resources. They look fantastic. The Prevent Child Abuse Vermont We Care Elementary looks fantastic. It's neat to see all the sharing of resources.
And so I think it's time to move on, Joan, to our next piece, and just how everybody can find us, right?
Yep. Yes. So should I? You want to do that?
You go for it. Go for it. You can see it in references.
All right. So anyway, on the screen you'll see actually contact information for everyone. So, and for those of you who couldn't write down as fast as Michelle was speaking, you'll see Michelle's email address, but you also see email addresses for Jane, Michelle, for Cordelia, and myself. And please, if you do have additional questions that might be helpful to that we might be able to be helpful in any way, please feel free to contact us. And also, Prevent Connect is also a great resource. The information on this particular talk is recorded, and you'll be able to listen to the recording of this, as well as you can get the slides from Prevent Connect website. So really, the contact information is there. We really are available, and just wanted to end with just a huge thank you to our speakers, to Jane, as well as to Michelle. Thank you to Prevent Connect for helping to host this, and for really, I think, bringing to light this issue. I think it's really been the hard work that everybody has been done, but I think in particular the two of you have really raised this to a visibility that I certainly have never seen before in my 25 years in this work. So I just want to give you my huge thank you. And Cordelia, I know you usually have some beautiful
I definitely want to add to that. And, of course, thank you to my partners there at Prevent Connect, and to you, Joan, for stepping up when my technology, as it turns out, is off on the whole grid, not just my building. So that's what happened, is our power went out. So thank you for stepping up. This is the reality of how we have to be adaptable in order to keep going forward with our work when against all odds. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to our presenters for such excellent information, concise, great resources, very exciting. And I am just absolutely thrilled and think that this is going to be a sea change when we look at really how we can help address this range of behavior in children, promote the healthy, address much more effectively and compassionately harmful behaviors, so that we are really focused on that primary prevention and early intervention. And it's so exciting to see all these resources that are coming forward. So thank you, everybody, for this. And for one action, remember that this is recorded, and that it's a wonderful way, if you want to share this information with people, to just let them be able to hear these sessions and other sessions. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank
This
you.
is David Lee from Prevent Connect, and thanks everyone for joining us today. This concludes today's web conference. We'll keep this. You'll be getting an evaluation form, and we will have a recording of this session available soon, and we will notify you when that is ready. So thank you all for joining us today. This concludes today's Prevent Connect Power and Prevention Ending Child Sexual Abuse web conference.